Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations every week at forums just like this one. I'm Deb Hackathorn, Government Relations Principal with Frost Brown Todd, and I'm also the proud chair of the Board of Trustees of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Thank you to today's forum sponsors, the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, and the Ohio Debate Commission, and our forum partner, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and their marketing partner, Columbus Dispatch, and of course, thank you to the host, View Columbus. Every CMC forum takes a village, and we appreciate everyone for supporting today's program. Thank you. Does Ohio need gerrymandering reform? With early voting already underway, Ohio voters are already weighing in on whether or not a new approach is needed to redraw the state's electoral districts. At stake, potentially, is nothing less than control of the Ohio State House. Today, we're going to unpack the future of Ohio's legislative districts and the choice that Ohio's voters face in this election. To introduce our panelists today, please welcome a representative from the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, Sharon Davies.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to begin by extending my thanks to the Columbus Metropolitan Club for hosting this important conversation on gerrymandering reform. And of course, I want to thank everybody in the room who took time out of your busy days to come and think about the question, does Ohio need gerrymandering reform? With the national election on the horizon, our attention is often focused on presidential and federal races, and for good reason. Yet much of the action that strengthens democracy takes place at a state or local level. For those unfamiliar with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, we are a not-for-profit, nonpartisan research foundation with headquarters in Dayton, Ohio, and offices in Washington, D.C. The mission of the Kettering Foundation is to advance inclusive democracy by fostering citizen engagement, promoting government accountability, and countering authoritarianism. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, we take no position on candidates running for office. We also take no position on proposed legislation under consideration, including ballot issues like Issue 1. What we can do, however, is help provide the public information that it needs to make informed choices when voters fulfill their responsibilities of citizenship. That is why the Kettering Foundation is very pleased to be sponsoring today's conversation. The strength of a democracy is that sovereign power is reserved by the people to govern themselves. Usually we do this through our elected representatives, but sometimes in states like Ohio that allow citizen-led ballot initiatives to take place, the people themselves are empowered to put questions about what the law should be directly to themselves and their fellow citizens. We saw that happen last year when Ohio voters were asked about how protective our state constitution should be when it comes to women's reproductive freedoms, and we are seeing it happen again this year on the question of gerrymandering. We are unlikely to hear today any of our speakers make a case for gerrymandered districts. Gerrymandering undermines the principle of one person, one vote, and the right of the people to choose their elected representatives and to hold them accountable. The topic is not whether gerrymandering is bad for democracy. It is whether Ohio continues to need gerrymandering reform, and if so, what that reform should look like. An initiative titled Citizens, Not Politicians, believes that gerrymandering is a problem for our state and seeks to solve that problem by removing elected actors and lobbyists from the redistricting process, replacing them with citizens. We hope that today's conversation will shine light on that proposal. I am pleased to introduce our distinguished panel that includes Maureen O'Connor, retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio and Senior Fellow at the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, Corrine Creighton, Vice President of the Brennan Center for Justice in its Washington, D.C. office, Keith Faber, the Ohio Auditor of State, our state's Chief Compliance Officer, Bradley Smith, the Josiah Blackmore and Shirley Knott Professor of Law at Capital University, all in conversation moderated by our esteemed host, Jesse Balmert, State Government Reporter for the Columbus Dispatch. Jesse, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you all so much for being here. I hope we have a lively and informative discussion. I'm going to jump right in. We're going to have about 40 minutes of questions for myself, and then later we will have an opportunity for you to ask some questions, either online through the live stream or here in person. So my first question is for proponents of Ohio Issue 1. What is gerrymandering, and how would Ohio Issue 1 curb it? Either for the Chief Justice or for Kareem.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. They instructed us on how to hold these things, and obviously I'm a little too close. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate your presence. I appreciate the Columbus Metro Club for their interest in this topic and for inviting us all here and for facilitating this discussion. What is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is the rigging of voting districts to benefit unfairly one party and disfavor or disadvantage the other. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. It is the fault of both parties, whoever happens to be in charge. The temptation is too great, too often, to gerrymander, to put party over people, and to strengthen your party and its place in the legislature. And we see that over and over again. Obviously, Ohio is one of the 10 most gerrymandered states in the country. It happens to be, at this point, gerrymandered by Republicans. But if you look at New York, you look at Maryland, you look at other states in this country who have a rank of being gerrymandered. Illinois, another one that crops up, comes to mind. So I guess I would say that both parties are equal opportunity offenders, and it's because politicians can't help themselves. I understand that. They can't help the urge to strengthen their own personal authority as well as the power of the party, and with the consequences of what that brings to themselves and to their party, to the disadvantage of the citizens of whatever state happens to be gerrymandered.
And how would Ohio Issue 1 seek to address that?
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks. I thought it important to always defer to people who are actually Ohio voters. I'm the lone non-Ohioan here. I want to just say a bit about, first, thanking everybody who organized this event, but then tell you a little bit about why I, a non-Ohioan and a person, I'm going to say this with some trepidation, who grew up in SEC country, is in Columbus, Ohio, in the month of October. I am, as was just said earlier, I'm the vice president of the Brennan Center. We too are a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that works on research and advocacy related to matters that open up our democracy. One of our topics, though, is focused on making the redistricting system open to all. The reason I'm here is we know, as has been said earlier, Ohio, this state, is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. We also know, because of our work with groups in Ohio, including the Organizing Collaborative, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, that this system has been very resistant to change. And what this provision does, among other things, is to, one, make sure that we ban gerrymandering. So if there are textualist lawyers in the room, look at the actual language in the provision itself. The provision ends gerrymandering. The necessity of this obviously is wrought by years of attempting to get this right and having politicians stand in the way. So we think, as we've looked at work around the country, that a system like this, the reason we're coming off the bench and being supportive of this is because it is important that we have a systemic change to the way the process works. What is gerrymandering? I want to go back to that. Another way of thinking about it is the relationship between elections and power. In a functioning democracy, elections are the power. In a gerrymandered system, power is totally immune, insulated from elections. Issue 1 is attempting to, in its essence, put the power back into the hands of people to engage in elections and sort power. I want you to walk away with 3 other points about issue 1 in terms of what it does. It bans gerrymandering on its terms. It assures that there's accountability, that the people drawing the district are listening to the public. They are members of the public, but they are also listening to the public and communities about what they want. They are doing so explaining the reasons behind the choices that they make, building a record so you get to know how and why the districts were drawn the way that they were drawn. It is also bipartisan. The commission can't do what it wants to do. It has to agree across partisan lines. Republicans, Democrats, Independents are a part of this commission. They can't get a map passed unless they all agree. That means the structure is built to do exactly the thing that doesn't happen in the present system, moving and talking across partisan lines to see what's best for the state. And finally, I just have to be clear about this. I'm a person who studied political representation, particularly where race is concerned, for all of my professional career. This system does right by communities of color. Under this system, we've released an analysis that shows it. African Americans in this state will do as well or better under the system, both in terms of outcomes and in terms of process. As I said earlier, the process will be something fundamentally different from what you've seen in the present system. You don't get a chance to have a conversation about what your districts look like because there are no hearings. This system requires them. You also get to hear the deliberation about how these districts are drawn. And if you are any part of the communities that have been fenced out of the political process, this is a process that serves you. So in all of those ways, that's what this provision improves on the existing gerrymandered system.
Auditor Faber and Professor Smith, I've seen a lot of signs for the no saying this will end gerrymandering. Could you maybe address what is gerrymandering and why this system, why you have issues with issue 1?
Yeah, I'm going to start out a little differently. I think the original question is do we need to fix gerrymandering in Ohio? I think the answer is, how many in here, I'll just do a random survey, how many in here think we ought to be gerrymandering in Ohio? Wow, not a single hand. So we found bipartisan conclusion already. The question is, does issue 1 do that? And the short answer is no. It will actually require gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, by definition, pull up your phone, take a look at it. It says you're going to draw districts for a political outcome. This proposal, under the guise of proportionality, will require you to slice and dice communities. You don't have to guess. It's what happened in Michigan. It will require you to slice and dice communities on this magical proportionality concept. And I'll go back and hit that more. And I love having out-of-state people coming in and telling Ohio what we should do. And this concept that citizens, not politicians, I just love the title. But the reality of this is that all of the people who are pushing for this, the $26 million that you're spending, over 80% of it came from outside of Ohio, from dark money groups and special interests and European billionaires. And less than 1% of it came from Ohioans. So maybe the real title of this group promoting issue 1 should be out-of-state special interest dark money groups versus Ohioans, because that's really what you're trying to do under the Trojan horse approach. We don't like the way this process works now. We need to put something in place. We want to put something in place that's going to change the rules under the guise of throwing politicians out. Well, the reality is, if it were just about who draws the maps, then why did you go in and change almost every single rule on how we draw maps? And so the question is, to answer the question of how you should draw districts, it's really simple. And by the way, I have a unique perspective here. I am the only member of this panel who has served on the Redistricting Commission, including as chairman last time when we got a unanimous bipartisan set of maps for the state legislative districts. And when you look at what happened in the last time, there were certain problems in it. But when we put it on the ballot in 15 and 18, it was designed to have conflict. It was designed to have problems. Now, look, I'll be the first one to say the current system doesn't work very well. This system will make it worse. And it will make it worse because effectively what you're doing is taking the rules that traditionally you use to draw geographical districts and turning them on their head. What you're doing is taking concepts like compactness and keeping communities together and making them subservient to this concept of proportionality. Well, here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Ohioans don't live proportionally. If you truly want proportionality, then the only way to do that is just to have statewide districts and elect 15 members of Congress statewide and have 99 members of the House and 33 members of the Senate statewide, and everybody can have proportional representation. But when you try and insert proportionality into this as a primary factor, what you're going to require this group of people, should they follow the rules, to do is to take areas where they can draw districts and eliminate all the competitive seats and draw safe seats for Republicans and Democrats wherever they have to and wherever they can. And that means that in a county like Franklin, because you start out generally in Franklin County in drawing districts, where you have roughly 1.3 million people, you could have 11 or 12 state rep districts. You are going to end up with, in a county where the population of Republican voters is somewhere between 35 and 45%, depending on what you're looking at, you're going to have almost no Republican state legislative seats. And that's because you're going to have to force Democrat districts into that area. That's what has happened everywhere else this has been tried. And by the way, the other discussion that goes along in this concept is you forget that there's one other major factor that comes into play when you talk about legislative and congressional districts. Elections matter. There are plenty of examples to where a Republican wins a traditional Democrat seat or a Democrat wins a traditional Republican seat because campaigns matter, candidates matter, and issues matter. And when you take all of those into consideration, look, I have said this before, I don't believe Republicans or Democrats are entitled to a damn thing when you draw districts. What you should be drawing districts is things that keep people together and give communities the right to have a say in who their representative is. Now, does that mean that you're going to have a perfect system? No. But this does the opposite. This guarantees a political outcome. That's called gerrymandering.
Proponents like to address the question about proportionality, whether this is a mandate or a guideline. What does that look like?
Let me start with facts. That's why I'm here. I've done redistricting around the country and seen every setting in which it can be done. This is dysfunctional, but I don't have to tell you that. I think you're living it. But I want to start with the point that the auditor just made about proportionality. I think he's then suggesting that he doesn't like what's currently in the Ohio Constitution, which is a take on proportionality. Article 11, Section 6, talks about an approach that tries to approximate ballots based on past elections. The commission that was, initially tried did not quite pay attention to that. And what this issue one attempts to do in a very clear way is to make that a more durable and clear way of, excuse, I didn't interrupt you. Please don't interrupt me. It makes it quite clear that you're supposed to look at past election results as a guide to determine how districts are created. It doesn't mean that you go and try to, engineer every single district. It looks statewide. But the main point to see here is what you didn't hear from the auditor, and I don't think you're going to hear from anybody here. Nobody's going to try to defend what the Ohio process currently did. It gerrymandered the state. And what is problematic about the attempts to try to get at, what is or isn't in issue 1 is they don't want to defend what they currently have. The way in which issue 1 establishes fairness is to say, take this as a standard, look statewide, and assure that there's balance. And we will consider this among a lot of different factors, but it does not, under any circumstances, say that you're engineering districts for a particular purpose. The way the districts are drawn are going to be based on the rules as they're set up, but also the input of the public about what communities should fit together. And that's all on the record. That's the challenge that I think right now you should all be thinking about. One last thing. Does anybody want to guess the percentage of House districts in the Ohio legislature this year that are actually competitive? If you're guessing anything north of like 50%, you're wrong. 3 out of every 4 Ohioans this year live in a district where the decision is already taken as to who's going to win that race. That doesn't strike me as a host of competitive districts. And that is the result of, God bless them, the people who currently run the process. That is by design. They want to separate elections from power. That's what issue 1 attempts to get rid of.
I'm gonna try to give Mr. Smith an opportunity to speak to this here. Just also, last year, Ohioans voted to enshrine abortion access into the Constitution and legalize marijuana, 2 policies that the Ohio legislature has overwhelmingly been opposed to over the years. Voters also rejected a measure from lawmakers to make it harder to amend the state constitution. I think one of the arguments of proponents is that Ohio's legislature is out of step with what Ohio voters want. Could you address the current system?
Well, I'd like to, if I could, respond to a number of things that have been said that I think are not entirely correct. And I'll begin by being the one person in the room who will make a limited defense of gerrymandering. First, this is not an anti-gerrymandering proposal. It is a proposal to change the way we district. It's a districting proposal. That's what we're talking about and need to think about. Now, how would I defend that? I would steal from Winston Churchill with a slight modification. Many forms of redistricting have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that redistricting by politicians is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that redistricting by politicians is the worst form of government, or the worst form of redistricting, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. And that's really the problem that you have here. You have to actually look at a proposal and think about how one should redistrict. Now, at the current time, there are 20 state chambers in the United States that are governed, that are redistricted by independent redistricting commissions, citizens commissions, right? 11 of those, that's a majority, have a greater difference between the percentage of the vote that the majority got and the number of seats it got, with the majority increasing its number of seats. So there's no magic in having a citizens redistricting commission. For example, when we talk about the number of seats that are not competitive, look, you're not going to get a competitive seat out of Cuyahoga County. You're not going to get a competitive seat out of Carroll County. It's not going to happen. One's going to be Democrat, one's going to be Republican. This is true throughout the country. The vast majority of seats are not competitive, and they're not competitive because if you want compact districts, and if you want communities of interest put together, you will have pretty uncompetitive seats. You will have seats where people have sorted themselves by their politics. You will have seats where people have certain views that they hold that are the majority views in that area, okay? So you can't use that kind of criteria. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is if we look at the question of competitive districts, there are a number of tensions in this proposal where the proposal can't quite decide what it wants to do. You see, in my view, redistricting is an inherently political process. You have to make a whole bunch of choices. What communities are you going to put together? What kinds of interests should go together? How compact should districts be? To what extent should you alter that to make more competitive districts? And so, like when we got to the Supreme Court with the last round, the first 2 plans were rejected by the court, saying, well, these aren't proportional enough. So then they go to the court with a 3rd plan, which is entirely proportional, and the court says, well, there are too many competitive seats, and we can't guarantee that the Democrats will actually get the proportion of seats that they ought to get, right, under some proportionality criteria. This is a kind of thing, do you want competitive seats or not? If you have competitive seats, you're rarely going to get proportionality because a slight swing in voter margins will dramatically alter the makeup of the legislature. If you had a randomly distributed voters and randomly drawn districts, right, and one party got 51% of the vote, how many of the seats would they win? They'd win them all. They'd win all 99 seats, right, because they'd win 51% in every district. So if you have a bunch of competitive districts and you just switch that by a little bit, a couple percentage points voter movement, all of a sudden you don't have proportionality, but it goes entirely the other way. So there's all kinds of choices that we're making here. The proposal also has questions like, what is a community of interest? It says that you ought to respect communities of interest, but it specifically says Republicans are not a community of interest. Democrats or not, or any other political party or not. And yet the proposal is based around the fundamental idea that there ought to be a certain number of sort of Democratic seats and Republican seats. So are Republicans a community of interest or not? Are Democrats a community of interest or not? And we see those tensions throughout this. So I think when you look at this, you need to say, we have a specific proposal before us. It's going to insulate the people from any kind of accountability. If there's no accountability, they have open meetings, but they're not accountable. I find it remarkable that Kareem was praising this because it would require bipartisanship. Of course, it doesn't say what will happen if some members of one party just say, nope, we're not going to do it. That's the way it is. I mean, the current system requires bipartisanship. But if they don't do it, you still got to come up with a redistricting plan. And I've crossed swords with the Brennan Center on numerous issues for over 30 years, and one in which they and I are completely in disagreement over and over and over is the makeup of the Federal Election Commission, where the Brennan Center consistently pushes for a Federal Election Commission, which I used to serve on, that would have a partisan majority, right? And I continually say, no, no, no. What's really good about the Federal Election Commission is it's got 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and you need a bipartisan majority to act. So I'm going to be honest. You know, when I suddenly hear the Brennan Center start saying, well, you know, we need this bipartisanship, I tend to think they're looking for results. And I'll close by noting of those 20 chambers, in 17 of those, the Democrats got a greater percentage of seats than they would have gotten on a percentage of votes. And those numbers were remarkable. They ranged as high as 24%, or 24 percentage points in some states. Republican differences were much smaller. But let's just take 2 of the oldest, California and Colorado.
But we're going
Okay.
to move on to the next topic, if you don't mind.
Democrats got 49% of the vote for the state Senate and 65% of the state Senate seats. And that's a Citizens Redistricting Commission. So there's no magic here going on.
I have a quick question for proponents about the makeup of the commission. Specifically, why is a 15-member commission of unelected individuals who can only be removed by their peers a better approach than the current system where at least 3 members could be removed statewide elections?
Well, I think that was kind of what I was just going to get at. So thank you for the question. Citizens commissions are kind of the gold standard in many ways for redistricting. In fact, I have an article authored by Professor Smith here from 2006 advocating for citizens districts, citizens commissions in order to draw these districts. And there was another article more recently, I think it might have been 2020, 22, something like that, where you also touted the merits of a citizens made up redistricting commission. And what's the beauty of it? Why is it so workable? Is because there is no self-interest involved. In the way Issue 1 has created the different varieties of the commission, there's Republican-affiliated members, Democrat-affiliated members, and independents. And those people, there's restrictions, obviously, in who cannot serve on the commission. And it's people who are involved in the running or the politics or the offices of the state, local or municipal governments. We want people who vote, who are good citizens, who have the initiative and the desire to serve Ohio and to serve it so that we can have fair districts where there's representation that is fair representation. And it is to get rid of partisan gerrymandering. And that is, I think, one of the most important features of this discussion. Gerrymandering they say it's political, and I guess using the current system that we have, that I saw 7 unconstitutional maps as the result of. Yes, it is embedded in our current Constitution, is the concept of gerrymandering. When you replace politicians with citizens, you eliminate the self-interest. And I'll give you an example. In this current amendment, you are forbidden, those who draw the maps are forbidden from considering the current addresses of the legislators. So it's not a system that will allow you to put pins all over the map, and those representatives and senators and congressmen and women who are already living in a gerrymandered district, because that's how they got to be, in office, and then you're going to continue to build around those addresses and continue that district, that gerrymandered district, and it is a self-perpetuating situation, and that's why you're not going to get rid of gerrymandering, even though the Constitution now, what was sold to the people in 2015 and 2018, was billed as the answer to eliminate gerrymandering. It does just the opposite. Now, why does it do just the opposite? And I've used this analogy over and over again, that both 15 and 18 had embedded in those amendments, I call it the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is the makeup of the Redistricting Commission, 7 politicians. And 7 politicians who are interested in putting party over people, creating maps that will enhance their power. Eventually it will lead to, if it's done right, a supermajority, which I personally think, I don't care what party it is, I think a supermajority is not a good thing for the balance of power and the way a state should be governed. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm against the current constitutional amendment we have, and see the need for something to change it. The answer to change it is issue 1, is the amendment that will be on the ballot this November. Issue 1 has been described as the gold standard for citizens' commissions. We examined all of the other systems in the state of Ohio, or excuse me, in this country, that are citizens' commissions. Not all of them are what I would call independent, because there is the thumb of the legislature in so many of them. Iowa being an example. You might have heard the governor touting the Iowa system. Ultimately, that lands in the lap of the legislature, which is something we don't want. You've heard, Governor DeWine saying he doesn't want to serve on a commission again. He doesn't think legislators should serve on a redistricting commission. I accept that support. I welcome the governor's comments on that. I think he's been misguided in holding up Iowa as an example. But I see the finger going up that I have to. This finger going up that I have to stop talking.
We're going to start the questions from people who are online, or for individuals in the room. You can line up behind the microphone right over there. I will let you respond, and I have one more question, and then we'll get to the folks out there.
Just by way of response to that, I'll be the first one to stand up and say, hey, the current system doesn't work very well. It was designed not to work very well. It was designed to force compromise. And in this case, specifically, a couple of the members told me at the very beginning, we're looking for the courts because we think the courts are going to rule in our favor. Ultimately, they did. And that was part of the problem, is there was very little incentive for some of the participants to compromise. When that was taken off the table, what happened? We got compromised. We got a 7-0 map. And I'm not going to even tout the great things in the current map, because I think there are things we could have done better if we had some clarity on some of these issues. So I'll be the first one to say that the current system could be improved. This is not an improvement. What is proposed, and you heard the chief talk about some of these factors that they stuck in there, and I'll disagree that it's the gold standard, because you made a lot of decisions in this language with the details and the specifics that left a lot of things hanging. And here's one. Michigan, which you apparently used as one of your templates, specifically made it clear that police officers and military officers are not excluded in their families. This language doesn't include that clarification, and therefore it's very likely that military members and their families are going to be excluded from serving on this. There's also one other huge glaring factor. Yes, you eliminate from being citizens people who are in the direct political scene as a partisan or a PAC. But what you don't include are other people who are involved in political activities, like the people who are providing most of the $26 million to put this on the ballot. So all of their supporters and all of their people and all their members get to serve, but anybody else need not apply. The people who sued on the maps get to participate, but the people who defended the maps last time don't. There are so many holes that are not accidental. They had to be intentional. And this was drafted from a heads we win, tails we win twice for our political ideology. And that's the problem with this proposal. But let me go back to this concept of this independent citizens group. The head, or the former chair of the Michigan group, just testified yesterday. And she pointed out that what happens when you have unaccountable people serving in these positions is it doesn't take them very long to stop listening. I am one of the only commission members who went around the state and listened to hundreds of hours of testimony. And some of that testimony was very helpful to me, particularly with regard to communities and the impact of splitting various communities. What happened, in her words, not mine, was that they stopped listening to people because they realized that nobody could tell them what to do, and they didn't have to listen to all this chitter-chatter, my paraphrasing word, of all the people that were trying to tell them what to do. But that brings me to another point. In this proposal, it effectively says you can't communicate with the commission members other than in a public hearing. So I know this shocks some of you, but having sat through hundreds of hours of hearing, there are people who have very good opinions, very good things to add about why their communities need to be kept together and why their townships or cities or their counties shouldn't be split. But they don't want to stand up in front of a group of people and share that because they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be subject to the boos that happen. In fact, Vern Sykes had to at one point tell some of the people who are promoting this, hey, pipe down, let's hear what people have to say. The fact of the matter is, when you silence people from exercising their First Amendment rights, that's not democratic. So that's one of the problems with the way you've drafted this Citizens Commission. And I can go on, and when you look at 16
Briefly,
pages of
Auditor, there's always going to be a number of
single-spaced
points.
First of all-
Briefly, can you just address whether police officers and firefighters can serve on the commission? And then we're going to jump over to questions over here.
Okay. First of all, the statement that police officers, military, and their families are unable to serve is not well-founded. That's not contained, or the language of this amendment does not exclude those people. That is an argument that is designed to confuse the voters, and I will tell you right now, that is not true. As far as the prescription of the language of this amendment, yes, it is detailed, and yes, it is specific, and no, it's not Michigan. Okay, I heard the Michigan member yesterday excoriating her colleagues on the redistricting commission. It sounds like she was the only brain in the room, the way she described her participation, and denigrated her fellow commission members. I think that there were answers to what she had to say, but I'm not even going to bother with them because we're not Michigan. We studied, as I said, all of the redistricting and took what was good and discarded what was not, and we did not take everything from Michigan. We have a much more detailed way to make sure that the commissioners are right for the job that they are seeking, and the ability for the public to see everything that's happening. The information that was just shared about nobody's allowed to express their views to the commission unless they do it in public. That's not exactly true. You can send an email, you can send a letter, you can talk to somebody, but that person then that you speak to has the obligation to share the information that you conveyed to them with the rest of the commission and do it in public. That's how you get your messages and your communications done, and not what Mr. Faber just misled you on.
We're going to move on to questions from the group.
Jesse, thank you very much. Thank you to today's panelists. Great questions at CMC have two things in common, and we will be enforcing them today. One is, how long does a great question take to ask for our regulars? 30 seconds or less, yes. And a great question ends with what punctuation mark? A question mark, yes. Again, we will be enforcing those today, so thank you everybody for your cooperation. We have about not even 20 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions. We're getting a lot of questions online from the live stream audience. We have a lot of questions here. So if everyone could please keep your questions brief and answers also, and that way we can get to as many questions as we possibly can. I'll launch us off with one from the live stream audience. Mark V asks, if issue 1 passes, what mechanism is in place to assure what the 15-member panel recommends actually gets implemented?
It is a constitutional amendment that will discard what is currently in the Constitution, and the map will be promulgated by the Commission. I envision there will probably be some opposition that'll be settled by the court, and that map will then be the map that will be utilized. When the map is drawn in 2025, it will be used in 2026. It will be used until the next census is taken, and a new map then would be drawn in 2031, and that map will be good for 10 years.
The concept that the chief just outlined, I think, is generally accurate, but there's one major proponent or issue in that, is that this system is really designed that if anybody challenges what they're doing, first of all, you're limited in what you can challenge, but if anybody challenges how they drew the maps and the proportionality and those things, it goes to a special master. And ultimately, I think this proposal is set up that a special master will really be the one who draws the maps, not the final panel. And that's one of the flaws in this system, that effectively, if we're going to have a special master drawing the maps, why don't we just go back and let the court draw the maps? At least they're accountable, and we can throw them out if they do crazy things. But that's one of the things that comes into this proposal, is if you get into a dispute, and if there's a challenge under the limited areas you get to challenge, it's very limited. The fact is a special master then draws, and the fact of the matter is I think in most cases you're going to have a special master drawing these maps. And
the court has to unanimously pick the special master from a pool that is created by a 4-member panel of retired judges.
Also, I'm sorry, it's also just worth mentioning that this is obviously in huge contrast to the existing system, where 7 different times the Supreme Court told the map drawers to get it right, and they just shrugged and said, make us. So this issue, if adopted, gives the court the ability to get it right based on the criteria that are set forth, that you all, entrench into law, so that using the record, using the input, you get a map that actually complies. That's the difference with this process.
Look, I'm going to take umbrage with the make us comment. I think the fact
you didn't say it. That's fair. You just sort of
the fact of the matter is that they came back and tried to comply, and ultimately, I think there's a question as to what the authority and the things that went down. But that's a conversation for another day. The real question here is this an improvement? And the current system, look, it was designed, and I was in the room when we designed it, okay? Bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, the same people who were proposing issue 1 were in the room. This was the compromise. That's what happens when you have a compromise system. And it was going to be messy. And the messiness was designed that if you have a bipartisan map, it's a 10-year map, and if it's not a bipartisan map, it's a 4-year map. Nobody anticipated the court injecting themselves the way they did. The fact of the matter is, it was designed to fail when half of the participants decided that they would rather have the court. And I know that because those commission members told me that they thought that they were going to get a better deal out of the courts than they were going to get by compromising. That was part of the problem with the current system. I'm happy fixing that and taking that out and working for a new model. This just isn't the right model.
Next question.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. My name's Tyler. I am an Army captain, and I'll start with the disclosures that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Army or the Department of Defense. I'm an Army captain because I was appointed to that position by the President of the United States. Federal case law is clear. I am an appointed officer of the United States. This amendment bans folks who have held federal appointive office from participating. I heard the Chief Justice say that it is not true that I and my family are banned from participation, but I did not hear her explain how it is not true. I'm an appointed officer. Appointed officers are banned. I don't understand where the misinformation is. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to need a lot more than a minute to answer your question if you want me to cite case law, which I do not have with me, sir. But there's law that I could have a private discussion with you and answer your question, but I just don't think that's appropriate for this forum. But thank you for your service.
Thank you, everyone. Mike Curtin asks, and this could be, I guess this is a one-word answer potentially. Mike Curtin asks, which state has the best system?
Obviously, we don't have the system yet, but I anticipate when Ohio's voters pass issue 1, we will have the best system. As I said, people who study this have described Ohio's proposal as the gold standard.
I would say the answer is none, because districting is an inherently political matter that has to be addressed in each state according to the communities of interest in that state, the natural geographic boundaries within that state, the nature of politics within that state. So there's none that you can say is the best. And it is true that partisans of this proposal have described it as just a masterpiece, but critics of this proposal, who can also be very knowledgeable, have pointed out a tremendous number of flaws in it as well. Thank you.
Brought up this point. I want to get back to something he said earlier about competitiveness. We released a report, and actually, if you look at any other organizations that talk about what competitive districts look like in the House of Representatives this year, it's going to be a tightly contested race. But if you look at who created the most competitive districts in the country, there are not that many of them, but they're done in independent commission states. You're not going to get a situation where you're going to see great and wonderful districts that are representative of communities in a gerrymandered state. I don't know where, the suggestion is to the contrary, where it comes from, but what you have to understand throughout all of this is what you see in every independent commission state is more public engagement, more discussion about how the rules should fit together, and ultimately an outcome that generally gets broad consensus agreement in the public. And even when there is a lawsuit, and sometimes there is, the courts rectify it quickly. You don't get 7 times back and forth between the court and the line drawers trying to correct a legal problem. That's the benefit of these systems, and it's quite clear that, yes, every state has its own approach as to how they approach the sort of fine-tuning of the commission, but what is abundantly clear, as I said earlier to start with, power goes to elections. It is not separated from elections.
I think the same answer is I don't think there is a great system, but the best systems are the ones that keep districts compact and allow communities, and in my view, cities, counties, and townships, to be held together, because that means people have a right and an opportunity to be represented by somebody who shares their values. The other thing that I would add is something that some of us have proposed for a long time, is drawing more competitive districts. This doesn't do that. This guarantees safe Republican and Democrat seats. And in fact, the proof is in the pudding, because when the Redistricting Commission tried to draw competitive seats, the only way to do it and hit the proportionality concept was this concept of it just wasn't accepted. And so that's the problem with this, is you will not have competitive seats. The other side of this equation is, when you look at the red-blue maps, and you all know, you've seen these maps, and the blue is the urban core centers and the red is the rest of Ohio. If you were going to allocate districts and a chance to have proportionality that this proposal requires, you're going to have to somehow allocate those 16% of the people in Mercer County who are Democrats somewhere in Ohio. The only place you can legitimately do that without slicing and dicing is around the urban core centers, where you're going to take the 35 to 40% of Republicans and give them no representation. And there's one other factor when you start talking about proportionality. You know who's forgotten about in the proportionality maps in this discussion? People who are unaffiliated or independents. You don't consider them at all. So if you're an independent, my question is, who's counting for you in this proposal, because the districts are being drawn between safe Republican and safe Democrat seats?
Short answers can be more than one word, so let's move on to our next one.
Hi, my name is Lee Martin. We jumped right into the mechanics of how all this is going to work, but I think the overarching problem and the reason we're all here is that the citizens of Ohio every election cycle are forced to resolve things by constitutional initiative because the legislature is completely and totally unresponsive to the needs of the people that elected them and who they represent. My question is, if you have unconstitutional district maps, how can you certify elections based on unconstitutional maps?
Well, this is something that's been brought up twice by our moderator and now by our questioner here, that the legislature is just not responsive. You know, I don't know. I mean, they get elected. Republicans get about 55 to 60% of the total vote for House and Senate candidates in the state. And for statewide office, they've been getting about 55 to 60%. So, you know, people vote on a lot of issues. There are going to be some issues where maybe they're unhappy, but they're picking a package of issues and leave out all the gerrymandering. Republicans would control a substantial majority in the state legislature, and people don't seem to be throwing up their hands and you know, causing a hissy fit about it. So I would disagree with the idea that we need this kind of change simply because the legislature is not being responsive. And that goes back to the key point I emphasized. There's no magic here. There's nothing that, you know, does this and we have a perfect fit, right? We've seen this in other states. It doesn't work. Justice O'Connor tried to grab me on a statement against interest, but I consider a statement for interest. We've learned a lot since 2006. We've been able to watch these independent redistricting commissions work, and we see that they don't work. And after one or two turns at most, they become usually totally captive by people who know how to play the system. So I would reject the premise of that question and the question that we never really answered, partly because I derailed it by our moderator, Jesse.
Can I just offer a counter view? Again, I don't think I need to tell you all what you see. You've heard a defense of the current system and the government that serves it. This is a system that has currently a good number of people, I think, who are either in court or serving time due to corruption. That happens because you're not really all that attentive to what the public wants. This is a place where you don't tend to have a lot of public engagement in how decisions get made. That tends to happen because the people who make the decisions realize there's no like hell to pay, pardon the language, at the election ballot box because the elections are already decided. You also have places where, as I said earlier, there are fewer choices that you have as to who you will choose. Democrat, Republican, or otherwise. By the way, they're independents by structure on the commission. I don't think that's true for your current ballot, for your current decision-making structure. That's present. The real concern here to be thinking about is, and I think this is a question that you don't actually need, you know, experts here to tell you about, do you feel like your present system is serving your needs? And to the point about zigging and zagging and, you know, the weird drawing of maps, look at the current maps. Don't trust me, just trust your eyes. These aren't maps that look like the people who live in these communities would draw the maps. And that's really the concern. If you're thinking about a way in which the public can drive how decisions get made about which communities go together, or how, let's say, the balance ought to be had in a particular part of the state between Ds, Rs, or non-committeds, maybe we should trust the people to drive that conversation and not the people who are served by it because they are politicians and they want to stay in power. That's really the question that's presented.
Briefly on the proportionality issue, yes, you have independents on the panel, but you don't have any independents when you're drawing proportional maps in the districts considered at all. The second part of that is yeah, if you look at some of the maps, some of the districts look odd, and one of the reasons they look odd is the city boundaries around many of the communities required things to go around the outside because you didn't go into them. But the fact of the matter is every community that's tried this before, look at the Michigan maps, they look even more odd. And when you try and do this to force a set percentage of proportional seats, to allocate all of those rural Democrats, because they're going to be Republican seats in the other areas, into Columbus, you're going to have crazy looking districts here too. The fact of the matter is this is a bad solution that is going to create things worse. And when you talk about extremism, I don't disagree that safe, guaranteed seats put the primary election to be the decider, and you can get more extreme Republicans and more extreme Democrats into those seats. This proposal will guarantee more safe seats and less competitive seats. If you were serious about reform, you'd have put competitiveness in as one of the factors. You didn't do that.
All right.
question. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We have exactly 2 minutes left, and we're going to try to get to one more question.
Thanks very much. First of all, I knew this was going to be a zealous debate, and you didn't disappoint, so thank you. I have one question any one of you could answer, and I should say I've worked in all three branches of state government. So I worked in the General Assembly in the 80s when the Democrats controlled everything. I worked for the High Supreme Court in 1990. I worked in the administration. Why do you think that the people of the state of Ohio put this ballot measure on the ballot for us to decide November 5th this year? And how do you explain the fact that at least one side has all this out-of-state money? That's the two questions. Thank you.
The question, as I understand it, is how did this get on the ballot? Why?
Why this year as opposed to back in the 70s or 80s or the 90s?
Okay, I cannot answer what happened before I was in state government or before I had to declare 7 maps unconstitutional that was handed out as the answer by the redistricting commission as it's currently constituted. It's time. It's time. You have the trigger, and the trigger was the dysfunction of our current system, and that's why we have this on the ballot now. In the very first opinion, I wrote a concurring opinion saying, citizens of Ohio, let's remember that we have the ballot initiative. Thank you to the progressives from 1912 that must have had a crystal ball because it has been used and used effectively, the citizens' initiative to amend our Constitution. It's time to do it because, again, what was amended in 2015 and 2018 doesn't work. It's broken. I don't think there's anybody that's going to defend it here. Out-of-state money seems to be an issue with people. Well, I'm going to say that democracy doesn't end at the borders of Ohio, okay? These maps that will be drawn will affect not only the General Assembly in Columbus, but they'll also affect the Congress of the United States that makes policy and decisions and laws, et cetera, for the entire country. So why shouldn't people who are interested in the democratic health of this country be interested in the democratic health of Ohio?
Everyone, I wish we had more time because I think we could have kept going. I think all of our panelists are quite well educated on this issue. I'd remind everyone that early voting is going on now, so it is your responsibility to look this up yourself, and I'm going to give it back to Deb.
Thanks, Jesse. Well, I hope you all appreciated the passionate perspectives of our panelists today. I'd like to once again thank our sponsors, the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, and the Ohio Debate Commission, and our forum partner, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. Thank you to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our marketing partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and of course, The View for having us here today. Our very special appreciation to today's passionate panelists, Kareem Creighton, Keith Faber, Maureen O'Connor, Bradley Smith, and our host, Jesse Ballmer. Thank you, thank you. One more, oh. And please join us back. We go back to the Ellis next Wednesday at noon, so please join us there for our forum on prescription for equity, creating access to healthcare in Central Ohio. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.